Hello, everyone, and welcome to Chapter 1 of Human Growth and Development. Actually, I thought I would spend a little bit of time in this first little lecture, and my plan is to keep these about 10 minutes to talk more about the class in general and what human growth is before I jump into the specifics of the content. My plan is to break up each chapter into shorter video lectures, maybe 10 minutes. I failed to set up my timer, so I don't know how long this one is going to go, and therefore break up the chapter. And then at the conclusion of each of the lectures, have a discussion post or an activity to sort of go along with it. So you don't have to sit down and listen to me ramble on in this very gray space for an hour at a time. So anyway, the first couple lectures are going to be more or less from chapter 1, which is what exactly human growth and development is. My plan is to go from this particular textbook. I hope this is the one you have. This is the 13th edition, and the 12th edition will suit just fine. I also have uploaded a PowerPoint slide, and I would recommend strongly that you print off the PowerPoint slide and sort of follow along with it. I am going to pause right here while I go get my PowerPoint slide. Okay, so I'm back. And this is what I would have given you if we were face-to-face in the same room. I would have given you the chapter outlines in a little note like this, and I would have this on the overhead, and I would have a place for you to take notes. There is a software where I can sort of point to that with my pointer, and my little picture will be in the corner, but I have not figured out how to use that particular PowerPoint software yet. So this is how we're going to do it for the time being. If this doesn't work, if you guys can't hear me, I hope someone will drop me an email somehow and sort of let me know. Okay, so human growth and development is a psychology class. And though it's not a requirement to have had intro or general psych, we're going to be talking a lot about some of the psychological concepts that you would have been introduced to in psych. I don't know if any of you are also taking psychology online, where you also get to listen to me talk to a screen or not. But so there's going to be a lot of overlap between the two classes. Having said that, if you don't have a psychology, a gen psych course in your background, you might want to let me know, and I'll just sort of fill in those sort of blanks, and I'll try to address that. So in this first chapter, we talk about what exactly human development is, what the scope of this class is. It is, and you can read it yourself, but it's basically the study, the scientific, the methodological process of understanding, making predictions about how people change and grow. So scientific study of the systematic processes of change and stability, because the idea is that as we come of age, there are patterns that are predictable across humans, and that would be sort of the stability part. But at growing is also change, and we also see changes in those stable patterns. In other words, what would have been a normal development, say in 1900, is different than it is in 2000. So it's stable because that's considerable. A term that we'll talk about, I think, here is normative, but it also changes. And what's also doesn't change is the sequence of development events that an individual person takes. So in other words, we all go through infancy and adolescence, and we all go through old age and die. That's stable, right? And that doesn't really change. But one interesting thing, I think, is that the onset of puberty, when particularly in girls, when mensa happens, is sooner than it has been historically. So it's stable because all girls, healthy women, get mensa, but it also has changed because it's happening earlier than before. So stability and change. Lifespan development is then understanding this stability and change over the course of a lifetime, right? There are 4 goals, and this will be a quiz question. There are 4 goals of development. Your outline says describe, explain, predict, and intervene. I believe your textbook uses the term modify. The point is, neither of those, the specific word that you use is not relevant. What's important is that you understand that what developmental psychologists are trying to do is they're trying to look for these patterns, recognize if something is going the way it's supposed to or not going the way it's supposed to, and then get involved. So you can call it intervene, you can call it modify, whatever. Either of those words is fine. And those are the goals, right? And that will be a quiz question. Development also has, if you move on to the 3rd box here on the PowerPoint slide, right, it talks about domains. And what is meant by domain, and the reason this textbook is so thick, and hopefully you've all taken your quiz, your syllabus quiz, we're going to address issues throughout the whole book, but we're certainly not, I'm not going to assign every single chapter, every single page. But the reason it's so big and it's so what I call content dense, there's just so much stuff to cover in this topic, is because we're talking about physical development, how our bodies change, and we're talking about cognitive development, how our mind changes, and we're talking about psychosocial, which is actually 2 pieces. So psychosocial referring to your emotional development and your social development, how we get along with other people, right? So we're going to talk about how our bodies change between birth and death. We're going to talk about how our minds change, right? How we learn to think, how we think differently between birth and death. And then the 3rd one is how we emote, how we express emotions, and how we get along with people from birth to death. The reason we talk about all of these things is because ultimately they're all, and that's the bottom of the box, they're all interrelated. If part of our biology isn't working, that may affect how we think, and that may affect how we interact. For instance, I think the one in the textbooks was the structures in our ear doesn't allow us to learn to hear. Because I'm not able to hear, I don't learn language. Language is part of my cognitive. It's another important word for a quiz, right? This was also on your pre-quiz. Cognitive means to think. So cognitive development is how we think, and language is a part of how we think. We think in the language that we speak. We'll get to that later. Okay, so the ear parts don't work. This affects how I think and if I can speak, and how I think and speak affects my social relationships. It's through the process of social relationships that we learn about emotions. So simply by having a missing piece in my biological ear, it can impair my ability to have positive or to have fulfilling, let's use that word, to have fulfilling social relationships. So those are the 3 domains, and there's a lot of overlap. If you're taking Soc, which I teach that class too, the 3 this chapter or this subject area just links them all up, right? On the other hand, let me go in reverse. So my social relationships, if I have parents who are nurturing and respond to me emotionally as an infant, that could affect how my brain develops and how I think, right? It could affect if I get nourishment, so it affects my body. If I have enough fat in my brain so I can learn to think, so I can do well in school. So the social context and the way the social context responds to my emotional needs affects how my brain develops, which affects the biology, which affects how my brain develops. So you see how they're all interacting. I think this is a good place to stop. When I come back in the next lecture, we'll talk about some of the other really important terms like heredity and environment. And let me see here, and maybe we'll get into some of the, yes, we'll get into some of the critical periods, but I think this is a good, so what I've tried to talk about here is what we mean by human growth and development, developmental psychology, and I've tried to introduce those domains of developmental psychology.